A lot of my decision making about my career as an artist has been based on putting my future in someone else's hands.
Wow.
So every time I've met a situation where I am dependent upon someone else to allow me to do what I want to do, I try to figure out a way to not have to do that only. Because at any point they could take that away, right? At any point they could quit accepting me to an art fair and there goes my livelihood.
This is the Vance Crowe Podcast.
Welcome back to the podcast. I'm glad you're here. Each week, I sit down and interview an expert to find out how did they develop the discipline to get on the frontier, the edge of what is knowable in their field. And for the most part, this podcast is focused on either the hard sciences or business. But this week is something completely different. This week, I sat down with artist Heather Haymart. Now, I met Heather after going to the St. Louis Art Fair held in Clayton, Missouri. This is a nationally recognized art fair where artists from all over the country come together to show paintings and sculptures and I can't even describe jewelry, anything that you can think of as art. There is a variety of the top level of artists from all over the country that come to show off their art. And Annie and I went on a Friday night and we're walking up and down the stalls and I'm in a great mood because we're just enjoying ourselves. And we encounter one art stall that I was completely captured by. I was drawn into it like a magnet. The colors, the way the light hit each one of the boards, I was mesmerized. And I know looking back on that night that Annie had to kind of pull on my shirt to be like, hey, calm down, because I was so magnetized by it that I just started a conversation with the artist. And within maybe a minute and a half, I invited her onto the podcast. And to my surprise and shock, she said yes. Her name is Heather Haymart. And she is an artist that has spanned everything from teaching small children to running galleries to painting murals and even now having her own special kind of art. And we'll go into a deep description of how I saw that art and what it looked like to me. And Heather does a little bit of explaining her art, but I think she's more than happy to let other people look at it and put their own meaning on it. So you will, if you're watching on YouTube, not actually see any of her art. And that's because I'd love for you to go visit her website, where she has a great job of having a website that can show off art much better than I could just by showing it on the YouTube channel. Her art can be found at heatherhaymartart.com. And if you don't go now, that's okay, because I'm pretty sure that by the end of this interview, you will have the same fascination with Heather that I did. She is extraordinary in many ways, not least of which she is not the prototypical artist, the disheveled that doesn't have anything put together. She is instead incredibly organized, very disciplined. And that's what prompted us not just to talk about art, but to talk about the business of art, how to make money in the field, how to have the discipline to be able to do something creative again and again and again. And then we go into things like having discipline to clean up your room or how to eat. This was one of those fantastic conversations. It's a rare treat to have built such rapport with somebody that is so special and such an expert in her field. It's why I am so grateful for the podcast, and I hope you enjoy this conversation as much as I did. So buckle in and enjoy this conversation with the very quiet and understated but magnificent Heather Haymart. Heather Haymart, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, thank you.
So you and I met only for a brief moment at the Clayton Art Fair. And for people that don't know, this is an art fair in St. Louis that brings artists from all over the United States together. And people wander up and down all through the weekend over at night while drinking, and there's music and everything going on. And it struck me that there is a strange dichotomy there, which is you have a whole bunch of artists that are expressing themselves in visual mediums. And then you have all these people that are going around talking to these artists. And I would guess that that's not the most comfortable thing for artists. Do you like talking to people at art fairs?
I actually do. It's kind of an odd position to be in because I am slightly introverted. I like to be alone and do my own thing. And I do get nervous each time before an art fair. I have to kind of psych myself up. But once I'm there and in it, I end up gaining a lot from the experience every single time. Sometimes you meet people that aren't nice and they say things that I wish, I didn't have to weather.
Is that what you're worried about beforehand, that somebody might be unkind to you?
No, actually not. That's not really, I think it's just the idea of just being there and being on for, long periods of time. Because it can be so draining to be on like that and to have to be nice for so long. I know that sounds horrible, but I'm there to try and sell art and explain art, and it is a business, but at the same time I'm also there to make connections, and I personally get something out of those interactions all the time. I learn from what people say to me, and I see my art through their eyes, which is a really valuable thing. So the nervousness, it's other stuff. Like, what if we have a storm and my tent gets blown away? Or what if nobody comes to the fair and I don't make any money? Or,
yeah, I mean, I can see that it's like all of the logistics that a regular business owner would have as stress, on top of the fact that you're kind of an introvert. The other thing that strikes me about being in those situations is, you were saying, looking at the art through their eyes. Is that something that you as an artist like really need? Do you need to have other people's opinions and their thoughts on it? Or is it like, hey, I just produce art, and if it happens to coincide with other people, great?
It's a little bit of both. It starts out being for me, and then once I'm finished with it, it's for them. And so it is nice to get good feedback and to connect with people. And when you do an art fair, you learn very quickly, like, they're not going to connect with me. Like, you see people walk by and like the husband points at the art and the wife is like, no, and you can see it
that
happening.
has to be tough. That has to be tough.
But you get used to that. Like, I just know that, like, some people like boats and some people like abstract, and I can't do anything about that. So
I'm going to push this just a little bit closer to you. You don't have to sit up. Just pull it towards you. That's fine.
Is that better?
Yeah, that's better.
So I do benefit very much from people connecting with me and giving me compliments. I'm not going to lie. That's fabulous. To sit there all night having people go, oh my God, this is beautiful. Like, that's wonderful. But I don't have to have it to keep making art.
So I wondered before you came over if it would be all right if I would describe what I saw in your art, and then maybe you can describe for the listeners what you're trying to put forward.
Sure.
It won't be a very sophisticated description, because I actually realized in preparing for this interview that I don't actually have a great vocabulary for art. And I think that is probably one of the most limiting parts of me enjoying it, because I see colors and I can only say red or blue. There's no I can't make distinctions in between those, but I'm going to do my best.
Okay.
What I was attracted to out of your art was that the colors were vibrant but not overt. So there was a lot of reds, and they would collide with another color, but it never felt like it was jarring. It felt like it was supposed to be that way. And then as you are drawn in closer to your artwork, you have a three-dimensionality to your paintings, that the paint is so thick that it actually comes off of the canvas. And it becomes this almost surreal experience to be looking at something that you were prepared to be in 2D, but now suddenly you're in 3D space. And the most striking of your paintings to me was one where I remember there being a whole bunch of red at the bottom of the painting. And then as you moved upwards, you saw that there was a tree there. Mm-hmm. And I am weirdly drawn to trees. We can talk about that at another time. But would you say that's an accurate description? Is that how you see your art?
Yes, I think so. I think that was a perfect description. I don't think you should.
All right.
You shouldn't worry. Just like if you go to the doctor and the doctor knows all the terms, right? But you go in and you're like, I have a sore throat or what's the difference between a cut and a contusion? I don't know, or a bruise. It doesn't matter. The point is that you communicated well, and I totally understand what you're saying, and then I can do the same thing back. But I also think that one thing about doing art fairs, especially, is I'm a former teacher of art.
Oh.
And so I think it's important. Like every single time we do an art fair, it's my chance to educate people on art, because I think there are so many people like you who maybe you would like art, but because you feel like it's the unknown territory, maybe you don't know the right things to ask, or you're intimidated. People can be intimidated by art, and like, what are they supposed to think and what are they supposed to say? And, through education, always, that's the thing that sheds light on things that need light shine on them.
What age of kids were you educating?
I did middle school for 1 year, and then I did high school for the rest. And I was a art teacher for 6 years.
Okay, so you were 7 years teaching, and this was right when you were out of school?
Yeah, I graduated. I student taught when I was so young that the teachers thought I was a student. Yeah, and then I taught right out of college up until I had my first child.
And then did you move into becoming a full-time artist?
Not yet. So I taught for the 6 or 7 years. It's hard to remember. And then I was in charge of a art club. And so we did murals around the school. And it was just really a cool experience. And I loved those art club kids. And so I had a mural painter come and talk to us. And so then after all the kids left, he and I sat there and talked for like another 2 hours. And I was like, oh, I think I want to make murals. I think I want to quit teaching and do murals for a living.
What was so drawing about it?
I think it was, the truth of the matter is, I don't think I'm good at teaching, but I didn't like the management of a classroom. And so I felt like I wasn't happy, to be honest, as a teacher. I loved certain kids, and the ones that wanted to be there, of course, like every teacher, you love the kids that want to be there, and then you're frustrated with the ones that don't want to be there. And I just wasn't cut out for discipline, and I didn't like when people were mean. I know that sounds ridiculous, but
the more I think about it, the more that being an art teacher would expose you to sides of students that 90% of the time or 95% of the time is tamped down. Mm-hmm. And then they get this one place where certain kids are going to thrive. They either have the natural talent or they have something to express that they can't in other places. And so you are really like in probably turbulent waters. And the reason I'm thinking of that is I think I was probably a terror in art school because it was something that it was embarrassing for me to do art because I knew it was never going to be as good as other people. And so I think it probably exposed vulnerabilities that maybe maybe another kid would feel about being in math class. I'd never really thought about it like that before.
Yeah, honestly, I felt comfortable with some troubled kids. It was more like the kids that just didn't care. And I didn't understand that. You're probably right, that they didn't care as a defense mechanism so they wouldn't look stupid. But I tried really hard to make it be an environment where failing wasn't like talent had nothing to do with failure or success. It was more about effort and willingness to learn. And I tried really hard from the beginning, every year, every class, to make sure the kids knew that, like, you're not going to be a favorite because you can draw well, and you're not going to be disfavored because you can't. It's all about what you put into it.
That was, I would intuitively have run in the other direction. What sort of student were you?
You mean when I was in college or high school?
Well, yeah. When you were facing an art teacher, were you the art teacher's favorite?
Oh, no, I wasn't actually. No, I loved making art, and I loved my art classes, but I was unnoticed.
Unnoticed?
Mm-hmm.
So then what made you decide, hey, I'm going to head down the path of becoming an art teacher? I have been making art since I was a little kid. My whole family, I come from a long line of really creative women. My great-grandmother, I remember just seeing all her stitch work in these embroidered pieces of art that she would make, where it would be like flowers and things that she'd frame, and everybody in the family had them. All my great aunts would be counted cross-stitch, that it's, these beautiful
colors and detail that was just fascinating to me. My mom had a friend that did these shadow boxes that I would just stare at those for hours. My mom, well, I'm skipping my grandma. My grandma, she's an amazing quilter. She used to have a ceramic studio where she taught people how to do ceramics. She was a seamstress. She, later on, like she taught herself how to watercolor. There was no end to her creativity. And then my mom, I grew up with her, setting up an easel in the kitchen with walnuts and trying to teach herself how to paint walnuts.
Really?
Yeah. So she would draw things with pastels and sketchbooks, and I would just thumb through all her drawings. So it's just never not been a part of my life, creativity.
And does that mean that it was something you felt pulled to do, or it was in lieu of watching television? Or because I genuinely don't have that. Like, to sit down and draw for me would actually be a punishment. It would be easier for me to sit and try and meditate against a white wall than it would be for me to try and paint or draw something.
I don't know. It seemed just natural. I'm not naturally athletic. I'm not. I watched lots of TV. I had friends. I played outside all the time. But yeah, it was just part of who I was. Like, it just kind of just came naturally. Being drawn to it. I don't even remember it being a choice or not choice, just part of life.
And so then that made it the natural thing that you would go towards when you're, hey, I'm finishing up high school and now I have to go to college.
Yeah. So when I went to high school, I went to my counselor probably my junior year, and I didn't have very good grades. I probably had like C average grades, and I told her I wanted to go to Mizzou, and she was like, basically, that's probably not going to happen. And that was it for me. I mean, it was like a challenge, and I was like, well, you don't think so? Well, I'll watch. And so then I got my crap together real quick and somehow got into Mizzou. I don't even know how it happened.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And I know getting into Mizzou is not that hard, but for me.
And if somebody had told you can't do it,
right.
Like that's
right.
What was the reason your grades weren't good?
Oh, I was a slacker at times. I had a rough freshman year, bad choices. And
Were you like a kid that got in trouble, smoking behind the school, that kind of stuff?
I got in trouble probably at times, yeah, when I was younger. I went through my rebellion phase probably right in my freshman year, and then after that I seemed to kind of just get it together.
Oh, way better to do it then.
Yeah.
Well, maybe. But yeah. And so then you go to Mizzou and you apply to the art department, and this is like
my mom I don't remember this, but we went up to Mizzou. And I don't remember, maybe it was like orientation or something like that. And she said that I went in to talk with the counselors while they stayed. I don't know what they were doing, maybe waiting in the waiting room. But I talked to a counselor, and I came out and announced I was going to study art. And they were just like, what? Like, they just were shocked. Not because they just thought I was going to go into something that would, be a career choice that would make a living. And so that was, I don't know. I don't even remember saying it.
So what does an art student in college learn about art? Is it a worthwhile thing to do? Study art?
Oh, I think so. Yeah. I think it could be better. Like, if I could just tell colleges what to do, and I think they're leaning towards this from what I understand, but if I could tell colleges what to do, I would, because when I went through school, I got a fine art degree and an art education degree. I got 2 degrees. And the fine art degree means that you just take art, like tons of it. I did ceramics, I did printmaking, I did metalwork, I did sculpture, drawing and painting. My emphasis was drawing. But you take everything. I did photography. I can't think of anything I didn't take in the fine art world except for
Sounds pretty fun.
It was a blast. I would do it again and again. But throughout it, your professors tend to tell you you're not going to make a living at this. You can't make a career at this. Nobody makes it. Nobody does this for a living. And so you just believe it. And so when I think it was probably like my sophomore year, and I was still sticking with art. My mom was like, so what are you going to do for a living? And I'm like, I don't know. And she's like, well, you better figure that out, because you're going to have to figure out how to pay for your life. And so, I thought on it and I was like, oh, okay, I'll be an art teacher as a fallback, and then it just became what I did. And so that was how it all kind of just went on that track. I did student teaching. I was lucky enough to get a job right away and then became a teacher. And I always say that when I was a teacher, I learned more there than I did in college. I kind of got off of the college thing, and I did want to mention that if I were to do a college degree again, I would do fine art and business and or marketing.
Oh, there you go. That's interesting because you are now an artist trying to make money.
I've taught myself everything, like as far as marketing, business, how to do my own, accounting and how to keep track of taxes and learn how to market on the internet and build a website. And I mean, I've been teaching myself all of these things. And
I would imagine that that's a pretty harsh dichotomy too, right? Business and art don't seem to go together. Mm-hmm. But if you are just an artist with no business, you will be like the art teacher said, you'll never make it.
Right. Maybe. I mean, there are artists out there that they are just artists and someone else kind of leads them and takes care of them. That is harder. That is harder to find because you have to somehow, I don't know, maybe be something more special or maybe just have a good connection with someone who wants to take care of that for you.
Do you if a kid comes to you and they're thinking about art school, do you give them the advice that you just said there?
Every time. Yeah. And I get that question a lot. I love the chance at art fairs when I get that chance to talk to young people about that, if you want to be this, if you want to do this, treat it like a business.
When did you make the conversion to being an artist that's an amateur, you just love it, to somebody that can generate actual income from it?
Boy, it's been a long journey. So I did the mural job for about 2 years.
Oh, wait, you actually did do the mural job?
I did, yeah.
And what does that mean? That people pay you to come paint on walls?
Yeah.
With what?
With what? What do you
like
mean?
Spray paint?
Oh, no. I painted with acrylic paint, and then I'd put a clear top coat that would protect it on the murals. So, yeah, I did a lot of them, actually, for 2 years. It was a pretty successful business.
Are they around here?
They have been. I would imagine many were in private residences. Like, one of my very first mural was my kid's pediatrician. And she hired me to do like a under the water fish mural in her waiting room. And that got me tons of business because people would come in all the time and see it and ask for my name. And so, yeah, it was a pretty good situation. And of course I gave her like a major discount because it was my very first mural and I knew it was going to lead to better things. So she got me a lot of business that way. And then over time, it just became like a word of mouth thing. And I don't remember exactly, but it's somewhere along the line, I was able to do a mural in Troy, Missouri at Stefanina's. My mom actually was my connection there because the owner of Stefanina's was her neighbor. And
is that a restaurant or is that?
Yes, okay. Yeah, it's an Italian restaurant. So I did these like 3 4x8 panels that I actually did in my house. And then like my husband built me this big thing that would hold them. And I was pregnant. This was probably one of the last murals I did. I was pregnant with my second child, and I was big and stepping up and down on this little step stool trying to get this painting finished. And then they went and they hung it, and it's over the bar. But I think it may be closed. But I've had people over the years, contact me and say, "Oh, I saw your mural."
And did you enjoy doing art in that giant scale? I mean, that's a different way of doing it where you have to actually move your body to be able to get to another part of your canvas.
I loved it. I loved doing murals. Like doing murals, I loved. At the time, my kids, I had like a 2-year-old and a 1-year-old.
Yeah, and they're wreaking havoc all over the place.
Right.
You're trying to keep them alive.
And I was essentially a stay-at-home mom / doing this. And so I was doing it on weekends and evenings. I'm home with my kids during the day, and then my husband would take care of the kids in evenings and weekends when I would go do a mural. And so that was another thing I didn't love because I felt like we didn't get to do anything fun,
Oh, interesting.
Because weekends were taken up.
With work, yeah.
Yeah. And so, yeah, it was just a balancing act. And so by the time I had my second child and I decided I was done with murals, and she was about 9 months old, And I decided to try and make a painting. I really didn't. I was actually a fiber artist for a while.
What does that mean?
Fiber arts is like, it's a pretty all-encompassing thing. It could be like working with paper. It could be working with weaving. It could be material like fabric. But I made these sculptures out of like wire and leather, and I would like weave leather, and I actually got them into some shows, and I just made all kinds of different weird things out of fiber goods. And I loved doing it, but I quit once I started having kids. It was like teaching and doing that was just too much. Being a teacher, I would do it over the summer. And so in the summers when I would try to be an artist, and then during the school year, all your energy goes towards being a teacher.
Wow.
So I feel like I got off track.
Well, I mean, so you were talking about you're doing murals and you're painting on these large canvases and moving your body around, and then somehow make the switch to painting then?
Right, yeah. So after having my second child, I basically took a break for 9 months to take care of a baby. I mean, the other one, she was 2 years old. And during that time, I decided to try and make a painting. So I just went down. We lived in the city. We lived in South City, so I had this really dungeony basement. But that's where, I had my pseudo studio. And I went down there and I made a painting. It was like 32 by 48 size painting, so it was pretty big. And it was just acrylic paint and totally abstract, something I hadn't done because I wouldn't allow myself to have fun like that with art. I always thought it needed to have like a purpose and people needed to recognize it. And, I don't know. It was something I would just never allow myself to do, just like have fun with abstract.
So you were down in this dungeon having fun?
Totally. Yeah.
Kind of burning off parts of the old way of thinking about how art works?
Yeah, absolutely.
So what were you doing? Did you have an image in your mind that you wanted to put down on that canvas, or were you just, how does this work?
Well, I had been trained in how to use the materials, and I know I'm capable of doing figurative work and like painting something you recognize. And at that time, really, it was just play, like just putting paint down and smearing it around and seeing what I think. And I immediately fell in love with textures while I was working and watching how the different textures crossed across each other and colors and how they played together. So I don't know. It just is one of those things. And I made probably 2 large paintings in like a few months there. And I heard about this show. I forget how this even went, but I made 2 paintings, and the one, I had a show that I heard about at this restaurant. I started getting involved with this group called Art Dimensions. And it was just this group of St. Louis artists who were coming together. It was led by this person named Davide Weaver. And it just was this group of people. And so I was involved with them, and I used to scour the Riverfront Times trying to find like art things to get involved in. So I finally found something, and there was this bar that was opening called Jaboni's, and it was in Tower Grove.
Which is just a neighborhood inside of St. Louis. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it was the Grove.
Okay.
I don't know if you know about the Grove. Now it's a big deal, but back then it was like really rough. And so she was probably one of the beginning people that like got, the Grove going, I think. And that was a long time ago because my daughter was born in 2001. And so it was probably 2002 that I did that, where I put my painting in there, and she bought it. Like it matched. I know everybody talks about don't match your art to the couch, which I don't think that's what this was about, but it just happened to go perfectly with this crazy ottoman she had. So she bought it. I sold it for like $200 to her.
And was this the first time you had sold a painting?
Yep.
Instead of would that have been tangibly different than a mural, where people are like, here's the canvas in my house, and this one is you're expressing something and it connects with somebody so deeply that they decide to purchase it?
Yeah. I was completely hooked. Like that's all it took. I did that, and that second painting I told you about, my cousin bought it from me. And yeah, like those 2 experiences right there, I was just like, oh, this is what I've been waiting for.
And it was, it felt invigorating because people were buying it and saying that they loved it.
It was very validating. Yeah.
And how did you set the price on these first paintings?
Start low. Just start low and see what happens. Yeah, that was it. I read, a lot of magazine articles and books and things about how to try to get into the art world. And so that was one of the things of advice that people gave me through reading those articles was, start low and see what happens. And if it goes well, up your price a little bit. And so that's what I've done.
And so then if you think about from there, when the Grove is just getting started in the early 2000s to 2019, you appear to have a pretty well-established business online. And what is your business of art now? What are you doing? How do you operate?
So my business is definitely in all that time has evolved over a lot of time and it's just had different iterations. But I was lucky back then. My brother was a programmer, and so I got him to build me a website early on.
Big advantage to get out there first. Yeah.
And so it was just kind of an online presence. I didn't have a store, but it was a way, like a online business card, kind of a portfolio type of thing. And eventually I think, if I remember right, he might have gotten it to where I could sell things. I can't remember. But so how am I where I'm at today? Is that what you asked?
Yeah, I mean, more or less, just what is your business now?
Through lots and lots of trial and error, I've learned that what I really want to do is, I thought for a while what I wanted to do is just sell online. If I could quit doing the art fairs, I would like to sell online.
No
primarily.
Anxiety. Don't have to worry about storms or if people show up or breaking art.
Exactly. Yeah. And I don't know if you know, but when you apply to an art fair, you have to submit artwork and you can get accepted or rejected. And so a lot of my decision making about my career as an artist has been based on putting my future in someone else's hands.
Wow.
So every time I've met a situation where I am dependent upon someone else to allow me to do what I want to do, I try to figure out a way to not have to do that only. Because at any point they could take that away, right? At any point they could quit accepting me to an art fair and there goes my livelihood.
Yeah, like building barns on rented land.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And so, and it was the same way when I had a choice between, I had tried to get into reputable galleries around St. Louis and, kind of had a little bit of success with that. But then I realized I feel like this is just an exercise in futility. Like it was just not the way I wanted to do things. I didn't feel in control of my career.
Yeah, and for people that don't understand the gallery world, that is, you make an arrangement with somebody that has physical space, a room or a studio, and you get to hang up your paintings. But in exchange for you hanging up your paintings and them driving people there because they have a reputation for this person finds innovative art or interesting art, then you're going to give a certain percentage. And it's usually not a small percentage.
No, it's usually half.
Yeah, half.
Mm-hmm.
I guess I didn't know that.
Yeah, 50, 40, 60, right around there.
Wow.
Yeah. And that's okay. Like, I was willing to pay it. If they were bringing me business and they were doing all that work for me, I believe galleries are valuable and they deserve what they get. I don't have anything against galleries. It was just my own personal, I didn't want to be beholden to someone who would maybe eventually says, we don't want to carry your work anymore.
Right. And you've built all that
Yes.
brand equity up with the people that come to their gallery, and now it's just dissipated.
Own. Right. Yeah. And so then it evolved, and I got involved in art co-ops where I felt more like I'm owning my own business. And so a bunch of artists that want to feel that same way kind of come together and co-opt the business. So we had a gallery. It was Gateway Gallery in Clayton. And it's just a bunch of artists, and you meet every month and you run a business together. And so someone takes care of marketing and someone takes care of buying the toilet paper or whatever, and someone else takes care of, I don't know what
managing the shop,
our website.
Yeah.
So it was a co-opted situation where artists got to, and then the main event was that we would have these receptions where we get the opportunity to sell to customers. And display my work. So that was a really great experience where I learned so much. And then after that, I decided, in the meantime, I'm always doing a million other things. So I taught art camps because I wasn't bringing in very much money, and the kids were getting to where they could go to kindergarten. And so it was like either go get a job or figure out something else that you can do while you still make art. And so I would do things like work at a gallery, be answering phones and things like that. I would taught art camps in Chesterfield Arts and like take my kids with me, and they got to do the camps too. And I don't know. There's so many different things I did.
Was this a difficult time? I mean, because you're
Yeah.
trying to be an artist and you want to just be painting and selling.
Yeah.
So tell me about that.
Oh, it was exhausting. So I also prided myself in being a stay-at-home mom. And so I wanted to do a good job with that. And I didn't want my kids to not have me 100%.
Right.
And so I was constantly torn between those two things. Between, wanting to be there for my kids 100%, but also really wanting to pursue this art career. And then knowing that my time is just going to always be divided up until, probably middle school. It was just going to be that way. And so I was always struggling with that. And then, trying to make money too, like trying to figure out how to contribute to the household income also. So yeah, it was a stressful time. But I wouldn't trade it, because what I did get to do is I did get to take care of my kids, and I did grow my business. I was just tired.
So when I think about art being a business, it strikes me how you maintain, like you're essentially selling creativity in a way, right? That you capture and you put into a format that you can then hand to other people. How do you have the discipline to be able to capture, to bring in that muse that allows you to be creative and deliver day in and day out so that you can have a business?
Once I was allowed to devote all of my time, this is hard to say, because I also owned a gallery for a while with my mom at the Chesterfield Mall, and we did kind of like a co-opted thing with the artists. They would rent space from us. But I would basically ran the gallery, and she ran kind of like a decorative arts side of the business. And we taught classes and all kinds of things. And so right after my kids ended up going to middle school and I had this freedom, this opportunity came up and we gave it a shot. And so then it was kind of like my kids not taking that time. It became the gallery took that time that we had together. And so in 2015, we decided to close. And, that I feel like that was when I finally got to 100% all in grow my business. And so it's only been, what's that, 4 years?
4 years, yeah.
Yeah. And so, and at that time, again, I'm always at this crossroads of like, well, if you do better this year, maybe you could keep doing art. And if you don't, well, maybe you need to go get a job. And it's just always that. And so I'm always like, that's an inner tension. Yeah. It's very motivating too.
Yeah.
And so when
gets you to do the things that you don't want to do.
Right. And so, yeah, once the gallery closed, then I was like free to just 100% do that. And it was just it's been no question. Like, am I going to go to the studio and paint? Heck yeah. I've got time now. I can do it if I want to. And it is a discipline thing. When you're a creative person and someone full of anxiety, it's the weirdest thing. It's the weirdest experience. I wake up at a certain time every morning because I want to make sure.
What time do you wake up?
I wake up at 6:30.
Okay.
And I do that mostly because my daughter, she's still in high school, my youngest daughter. My oldest is at college. And so I get up to make sure she gets off okay and, just make sure she woke up, those kinds of things. And then I jump in the shower and get on with my day. But when it's time to, like, everybody's gone and it's time for me to go down to the studio, every single time I have to kind of like muster up the motivation to get down there, even though I want to be there. It's such a weird. We actually spoke about this very briefly at the art fair, and then I realized that I was like way overstepping because I was very excited to meet you. But the concept of resistance, have you heard of this term? No, I haven't.
So there's a book called The War of Art, and it's about like, how do you manage if you're going to be a creative, how do you make sure you have the discipline to do it? And I read it right at the time when I decided I'm going to start my own business. I'm going to leave the corporate world and do this thing. And the book is fascinating because it names what is a voice that is in everyone's head that you don't even realize is a voice. It's just a part of the cacophony of sound, which is, when you start jogging, right? You're like, I'm going to start exercising. The first day you're really excited, so you go out and do it. The second day you're like, hey, yeah, I'm really excited about it. And then the third day a voice says, well, you might get hurt, or it might be too cold out, or you worked so hard yesterday, or whatever it is. It's all of these reasons why you shouldn't do this thing. That's the voice of resistance. And once you name that voice of resistance, then you start seeing it show up in all sorts of places that was always there. Mm-hmm. You just didn't have the name for it. And I can completely relate to you saying, in the morning I'm excited about working, but there's something that keeps me from it. And that's what I'm so curious about, is how can you just keep walking past resistance every day?
It is definitely all about habits and like routines for me in particular. And so once I'm done with my breakfast, like I have a choice to make, right? I can procrastinate and look at my phone and read the news or whatever, or just go over and fill my water bucket with water because I don't have water in my studio. I have to get it from the kitchen and take it down to my basement studio, which is really nice. My basement studio is wonderful. But it does not have water. So that's kind of like one of the things. Like if I look across and see my bucket, I'm like, just get over there and fill that with water. Let's go,
Wow, what a metaphor, right?
Yeah.
That seems like a heck of a metaphor.
Yeah, no kidding. I never thought of that.
And is it is it something you succeed at every day? Do you get in pain every day?
I try. If I don't, there's a reason. Like maybe something like this right now.
Oh,
like,
no, I kept you from filling up your bucket? Oh, no.
That's okay, though. And then I've gotten myself to a point where if I don't get paint time in the morning, then I'll try to shift and maybe paint in the evening. Unless I don't have a major deadline or, if I'm not low, then I tend to slack off on that part of it. And I'll just be like, well, I had no time. I couldn't paint today.
And so, if we carry out the metaphor of the bucket and say, you've got to fill it up and then you've got to go downstairs, your paintings are extremely expressive, or at least when I see them, the thing that reflects back is there is passion here. There is somebody was trying to say something that they want to be Lindy. They want to live on long into the future. How do you capture? It's not just as much as like, hey, I got to fill up the water and go downstairs and start grinding away, because you can't just grind. You have to be creative in some way.
Yeah. I feel lucky that comes pretty naturally. Like I rarely look at a board and not know what to do. So when I get downstairs, I typically will sit down on a chair and a cat will end up on my lap and I'll stare at a blank board. This is when I'm beginning a painting. If I've got paintings going, it's simple. You just get going.
You can just already grab onto the wall and
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. But when I'm beginning a painting, I usually will sit down, kind of just stare at that blank board, and somehow there's just, sometimes I'll have like a thought in my mind, like I would like to infuse this painting with, joy is kind of my tagline of I want joy to go into my paintings so that joy will come out of my paintings.
Wow, that is like the highest bar that you could set. I mean, I can't think of another higher bar that you could set than I want my painting to express joy.
Yeah, it's important to me, and it's also selfish. Like I can definitely go down the negative, and I've had those times where I thought, oh, I could definitely get into making that edgy, hard, emotional stuff that makes people hurt. But I don't want that in the world, and I don't want it in my life. I could choose to focus on that, but every single day that I make a painting infused with joy is my attempt at kicking out the bad stuff of my own.
Wow.
Yeah. So it's definitely selfishly motivated, and I get something out of it. But then I hope that once I've done that, then someone else gets something out of it as well.
And when you're looking at that white canvas, do you imagine something that then you express on there? Or like, I don't even have a great way to ask this question, and there may not be an easy way to answer it, but I'm trying to get at what begins as, where are you pointed in a direction? How can we understand this?
So it's a combination of like materials, right? Like color and texture. And I think about that, like technical stuff. And what do I want to do with that today? Like what colors do I want to mess around with? And what texture ideas did I have that I want to apply to this one? So there's that, the technical side. But then there's also the imagery side. And since they're abstract, it's hard to explain it as imagery. But when I look at a blank board, I've tried to explain it like this before. You know, when you close your eyes really, really hard and like you keep your eyes closed and you can see all those colors kind of going around.
Yeah, sure.
I feel like that's what happens between me and my painting. So I'm sitting there staring at it, and without closing my eyes real tight, I can just kind of see those things come onto the board before I begin.
Wow.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so then it just kind of goes from there. Once I see it, it's done. I'm ready. And then I get going. Sometimes I sketch it on the board. Sometimes I write on the, like if I had a painting I called Time to Think, because I was feeling a little overwhelmed at the time and I just needed some time to think. And I wrote that on there. And so then that became the title of that painting. And then sometimes I don't do that. Sometimes I just go right in with color and texture with no drawing at all. It just depends. I think the creative process needs to be a little more flexible.
Yeah, I would imagine for me, one of the biggest challenges that I have with creativity is if I sit down to be like, I'm going to be creative now, it's almost impossible. I almost have to distract myself from what I'm doing. So I hate running. I don't enjoy any part of it. But most of my good ideas so I go out and give a lot of talks. Most of my good ideas for giving a good talk are about 5 miles away. And I have to run out and come back. And about mile 3 or 4, they start coming. And then I can sit down and bang it all out.
Yeah.
But for me, there's no way I could just sit in front of a blank PowerPoint or a piece of paper and draw anything out. In fact, the harder I try that, it's almost like cracking my pencils or something like that.
Oh, I can understand that completely. I think that whatever is happening in your brain when you're running so that you can come back and do those things is similar to whatever I'm doing prior to going down to the studio. Even if it's just like piddling around, looking at Pinterest for a little bit, or reading an article of the news or something. Like there's rarely not something else going on back here for me. So that's just part of it. And I do think that there is, like, as I walk down the steps to my studio, that's when something changes. You know, it's kind of a mindset, but also like a process.
Well, what you're describing about filling up the bucket and then walking down the stairs, that is perfectly in the War of Art, where he says you have to have a ritual, you have to follow this ritual. And I'm a total believer in habits. Like, one of the things that I lost when I started my own company was when I went to work, I used to wear the exact same thing every single day. Mm-hmm. And people would kind of laugh or joke about it, but it cut off a whole bunch of thinking that I used to have to do. And now I find, because I'm just living here, it's just me, I just throw on whatever clothes are there. But I'll probably get back to that level of extreme habits, because the more that my schedule is tightened down, the more creative I find myself to be. And then I always think that, because as you get more creative, then you start being like, oh, I can let this thing go, or I can try. And then before you know it, you're putting on weight and not getting things done. And
absolutely. Yeah. And I think you're right that it somehow simplifies everything else so that the one thing that needs to have the most energy gets it.
That's right. And so when you think about things like color, do you have an emotion into those colors already? Mm-hmm. Or does that change depending on how you're feeling?
Yes and yes. I think I definitely have kind of like a code in my head of like what colors express what emotions. But then when I do different combinations of colors, that changes that. And so it'll also be like after the colors are together, then I feel something too. So it's both.
And do you feel like you have a pretty accurate idea of the emotion that you're putting in with colors, that somebody is going to be able to pull that same thing out, or does it really matter to you?
I I try not to attach myself to what someone else experiences.
Wow.
And so I put what I do in, and then when people start to look at my work and I hear how they receive it, I learn something new all the time when that happens. Sometimes people are right on. Like, I thought this, I put it into it, and then this person felt it, and I'm like, that's an awesome feeling. But then there's other times when I make this painting that has this certain message or feeling or thought, and someone else had a different one. And when they express their thought about my art to me, and I see it, that's exciting too.
Oh,
You know?
yeah. That's very. It's egoless, right? It's probably a very healthy thing to be able to do, because I know when I go to give a talk, if somebody comes back and says, "I thought of it this way," I'm really pretty tied to how I meant it to be, right? I'm up there expressing an idea, but to hear you feel a sense of joy, or at least being able to pull a sense of satisfaction out of that, that's pretty healthy, I would think.
I hope so. Yeah, I hadn't thought of it that way. But yeah, it's pretty cool. I mean, to see someone else's interpretation or that they felt something different is all it does is expand rather than constrict.
Oh, that's great.
Right. So, I mean, then I just know something else I hadn't thought of, and that's an amazing thing to have.
So are all of your friends artists?
No. I have a lot of artist friends.
Is your husband an artist?
No.
No.
No, he would laugh at that too. For all of my career of being an artist, he has made my boards for me. So he's very handy. And so he's always made the boards that I paint on. I don't paint on canvas. I paint on wood.
Oh, I didn't realize that.
Yeah.
I didn't even realize that by looking at your paintings.
Yeah, I like a hard surface. I don't mean to get off the topic.
No,
of
this
my
is fine.
husband,
We can talk about whatever.
But my mom actually invented the product that I use in my paintings. So different artists use lots of different media to make their art. I use acrylic paint and then this acrylic-based paste that is the thicker stuff that you see in my paintings.
Which is why you can make that texture then? Mm-hmm. Okay.
So I use color and texture together, and in those thicker areas, that the bulk of that is more of this texture paste that my mom actually invented. It's called wood icing. And so she's been doing that since I began. So I made those 2 paintings I told you about with no texture product. And then she, at the same time, was kind of developing this stuff. And so I tried it. And then, so I've been doing it the entire time that she invented it. I've been using this texture in my work, and it's evolved. It's been so many different things over the years.
Well, there's something truly like magical about your mother creating the textured paint that you're using. That's pretty surreal.
It is. It is. It's pretty amazing, I think. And it's been a real treat, to get to. That's why we were partners when we were at the gallery together.
Oh, that's right.
So she sold her product and I sold art. And then I had other artists come sell their art, and she had classes and taught people how to use her product and sold other paint products and things. And she was definitely in the more decorative finishing realm of things. So like you would use her product. Many people used her product on like furniture and cabinetry to add an element of interest or creativity to things.
So you mentioned anxiety about having art shows, and it's something that you deal with. How do you balance between anxiety and trying to create paintings of joy?
Well, I've learned, I didn't realize this is how it was happening, but painting has been one of those things that helps me slow down my thinking. And so I go through life, I don't know, having a lot of thoughts all the time. And it's not just one set of thoughts. There's a few thoughts in there, like I think of them as like forefront thoughts and then background thoughts.
Yeah.
And they're constant simultaneously all the time. And it can be great. I mean, I think quickly, and I'm a problem solver, and, I'm a creative problem solver. So, anytime something's going on, I can think it through pretty quickly and figure it out, the solution. But it's also pretty exhausting when you're constantly worried about things that aren't going to happen, like the safety of your children or the, you know,
So it's that level. It's not just, hey, we got to make sure I pay that bill and I've got to get to the store, but it's, are my children safe? And
sure. Yeah. It's pretty exhausting.
I think that I'm fortunate in the sense that I don't have the same level of anxiety that I've witnessed other people in my life have. But it also is a little bit of a handicap because I don't understand what goes on in the minds of people that have high anxiety. And I know probably all the way through my 20s, I kind of blew off anxiety. And I actually had a roommate in graduate school that suffered from panic attacks. And that was the first time in my life that I was like, whoa. When he was saying he was stressed out, he was not kidding, because now he's lying on the floor and it looks as though he's having a heart attack.
That's terrible.
And so when did you start to realize that the anxiety that you had was not the anxiety that other people had?
Just recently, actually, probably in the last, well, that's not true. Maybe about 10 years ago, I became aware of it. And then since then, I've become more aware of it. I guess we'll put it that way. And so, and realizing that I could work harder to do something about it. So, people say to try meditation, and I have tried that, and I do believe in it, but I have a little bit of a hard time sticking with it. And what I realized is that I think painting is kind of my meditation, because my mind is so active. When I paint, it's like something with my hands and something with my mind is causing me to slow down. My mind to slow down.
I mean, that makes perfect sense to me. I've started the practice of meditation, but I also have those times when I'm like, I'm too busy for it. But I also have started doing Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And the fascinating thing about that is so a lot of people don't really know the difference between like Jiu-Jitsu and say karate, but Jiu-Jitsu, are you familiar with it at all?
Not a lot, no.
So Jiu-Jitsu is you go and you can use any move that you want that's not striking or kicking or biting or anything like that. So it's almost wrestling, but you can use the collar of the thing the person is wearing. You can manipulate their sleeves. And so what you're going to is to the point when the other person taps out. So you are going all the way to the edge of, if they kept going, you would either break an arm or you'd be choked.
Yeah.
But for me, I can walk into that studio with as high of anxiety as I get, stress or whatever. But you walk in there and you are so on that edge of chaos, right where things are out of control for you, that by the time you're done, I walk out of there and I don't feel anything other than happiness and contentment and just total still waters is what I would describe it as. Yeah. So when people talk about meditation through some other form like painting, it makes total sense to me that it doesn't have to be I am seeking the thinker of the thoughts.
Right. Well, and I think what I learned was that meditation's all about mindfulness, and I couldn't get my head around that. But I realized when I'm painting, that's what I'm doing, is being mindful. So when you're trying to slow down your thoughts, just purposely slowing down your thoughts is not so simple. But if you give yourself something to focus on, like with a lot of people, that's meditation. But for me, having something to do with my hands and my eyes and my brain all at the same time is somehow being mindful for me.
And are those voices then tamped down? Do they go away? Do you get to capture their creativity?
They don't go away. But maybe there's just less of them. In other words, they don't take over as much.
Do you feel like those voices, and I was kind of naming them earlier as resistance, do they feel quintessentially you? Do they feel like that those are the voices of Heather, or do they feel like the voices of some other thing?
Both. Mostly me, though. Yeah, there's definitely another aspect of like hearing other people say bad things or other people disapprove, or, like that other stuff that I think other people can relate to, that like, you worry about what other people think in situations, or maybe you had an argument, so you're thinking about that person's point of view.
Oh, yeah.
And that kind of replays in my head at times.
That was probably the best thing about meditation for me was there's a guy named Sam Harris who he made an app for meditating, but he also has these like tiny lectures about them. And one of the lectures he talks about is if you find yourself continuing an argument that you had with somebody a half hour ago or a day ago, you are not focused. You're not there. You're not present in this moment. You are present in a moment that you have no ability to change whatsoever. Mm-hmm. And that was very helpful to me.
That is helpful. Yeah.
Because I spent a lot of time thinking, oh, if I had only said this thing. And I don't even mean just in arguments. I mean like in a disagreement or in some situation where I know I could have done it better. And I sit there mimicking what I know they would have said and imagining all these various situations of what I would have said or could have said. Mm-hmm. But in the end of the day, it's like scribbling on a piece of paper. It's not really getting you anywhere.
No, you're right. I think that's probably one of the more important things I'm learning about anxiety is learning to acknowledge or recognize when it's not doing any good and then do something about that fact. Like don't allow that conversation to continue because it's going nowhere.
Yeah, there's nowhere. And are your daughters artistic?
They are. Yeah. I laugh about how probably for the first 10 years my oldest daughter hated crayons. Like she hated coloring. And I was like, what kind of torture is this that an artist has a daughter that won't color? And then my youngest daughter, she was, like constantly coloring and doing all the artistic things that, little kids do. But my oldest daughter, over time, became quite a pen and ink artist. And so I guess just pen on paper. So she just still doesn't like color, but she does these pen drawings that are wonderful. I mean, she was going through a hard time, and that process really helped her. And she's continued it. Like she's fantastic. And she she took maybe a couple drawing classes in high school. Of course, I taught them things all the time.
What can you teach about art? How can you hand? To me, it seems like something impossible to learn. You either have it or you don't. Really?
No, it's technical. So like if you could teach someone how to work on a car, you can teach someone how to draw.
Really? You would put it that?
Sure.
Tell me more about that.
It's really just about observation. And so when you start with drawing, like typically art progression starts with drawing and goes to other things. And so when you're doing a drawing, it's typically art teachers will have a student draw a still life or draw a figure like the human being. And it's a process where you try to draw what you see, and then you learn ways to do it. Like you learn tools and tricks on how to draw what you see. Like one of the tips is to draw around things rather than draw the thing, draw the space around things. And when you do that, all of a sudden you're like, oh, I drew the thing.
Oh, that's interesting, because you'd be just saying, it's almost like not looking directly at it in order to be able to see it.
Yeah. Yeah, in a way.
Wow. That is meditation. That is at its
truly.
very core. That is definitely meditation. Look at the thing, but don't look directly at it.
Yeah. And there's just all kinds of ways to do that. I mean,
give me more of these. I like that. What are other tricks?
Well, there's more just technical things too. Like you just learn which pencils make different kinds of marks, and which are going to be dark and which are going to be light, and then which kind of marks express this type of thing. And how do I shade and blend, naturally, so where it doesn't look like scribble, but it looks like a blending. And that's all technical practice, just like everything else that everybody learns in the world.
Wow. I kind of have felt like there are people that are artistic and people that are not. And the people that are artistic can hone in on a style, but I'd never really thought about it. Well, I'd never thought about it in any way like this. And I was talking last week about the MC Escher exhibit that I thought was really neat, because on the first floor of the exhibit at the World Chess Hall of Fame, you see when he was just getting started, and then you go upstairs and you see how he was a master.
I didn't see it. I would have loved to, but I didn't even know about it until just recently. But I knew I missed it.
I mean, it was phenomenal. And I would like to see more art like that. In fact, it'd be really interesting. I'd be interested to see your previous art and then how it grows, because it wasn't until I saw that exhibit that I realized, like, oh, people grow over time. They hone this, they become a master. You aren't just a master artist just because you have that innate talent.
Right. It's not magic. There's nothing magic about it. I mean, some people are, technically minded, and some people are mathematically minded, right? Or, biology is they just understand more easily. And so creativity, that's true. But I think creativity spans across everything. Like, I have a sister-in-law who's a doctor, and she's also took drawing classes in college too. But she explained to me that she feels her profession is creative because she is trying to be a creative problem solver when she hears symptoms and she's trying to help someone figure out what's wrong with them. That's creative too.
And it's always true that you can't, the more that you become an expert at something, the more you know the rules, then the further you get away from them, the more you can apply it, as opposed to being like, I don't care about the rules at all, so I'm just going to start from scratch. So I guess what you're saying here makes a lot of sense. I just never really thought about it that way.
Yeah, I think most people don't. I feel like for some reason society has made art be so many things it's not. We're not starving artists. That's just a silly thing that people have said for years and years. And like, we're not crazy. I mean, some of us are, but aren't we all? Like, there's crazy doctors and crazy truck drivers. So like,
sure.
Just all those stereotypes about art.
Yeah, I mean, to be totally candid, I was expecting you to be less well put together. I was imagining a person that would show up, carrying bags of things and be disorganized. But this conversation you seem to be a very disciplined person.
I hear that a lot, and I've met lots of artists that are the full range. People that are, totally disheveled and don't have anything together, and people who are maybe more together than me. And mine has come over time. I think that I was a mess. Like, my room was a disaster in college. I had crap everywhere all the time. I was late everywhere. I kept a calendar, but like, it happened over time. It happened over, I think, out of necessity, basically, when I had kids. I think that having kids made me become more disciplined.
And do you now clean up your room and make your bed in the morning? And
I get my husband to make the bed.
Hey, it doesn't matter as long as it gets made, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you're describing about out of necessity. That was me as well. I in college, I was in if you had gone to my locker in middle school or high school, I was just dumping things in there. And then I was a deckhand on a ship, and I was probably the worst bunkmate because I just didn't care. Right. And then it wasn't until I was in my 30s when I was like, hey, wait a second. If you make your bed every day, then you get to go to bed in a made bed. And it's pretty great.
Right.
And then you start realizing, like, wait, I can expand out from clean up my room to all these other areas of your life. And this is a really good conversation for me. This is cathartic in some way.
Good.
But the level of creativity that was open to me is always higher the more I ratchet down my discipline.
Yeah, I think so too. And maybe not everybody works like that, but that's how it works for me for sure.
You were saying earlier that you are trying a new diet before we put this on. When you start a new thing, like a new discipline, and we can talk about it, are you worried about that messing with your creativity? Is that something that you are like aware of, or no, I've got enough flexibility, I can try new things?
Yeah, no, I can be flexible and try new things.
And what are you trying?
I've been trying intermittent fasting.
For how long?
Maybe 2 weeks.
Oh, okay. So this is brand new.
Brand new, yeah.
And is this the first time that you've experienced hunger, like intentionally?
No, I think I've over the years maybe had some bad habits.
Oh, really?
Yeah, but this is I'm a healthy. I have a healthy attitude around food and things now. But when I was, younger in college, I was like, oh, I'll just go without eating till I lose weight,
Oh, okay.
Not like I had anything clinical, but yeah, it was stupid. And now, Yeah, I was just thinking, did you bring this up because you heard my stomach growl?
No, no.
Because so this is brand new. I have a girlfriend who came here to visit from Arizona, and she told me about her sister and she are trying it. And I was like, I'll try it. My husband, he's been trying to lose some weight and get healthy. And he was trying the low carb thing again, which he's typically had success with. And this time it's just not really working for him. And so I told him about it, and we watched a couple YouTube videos. I haven't even read a book yet. And so we just kind of like have halfway been trying it, like 5 days a week. And then maybe because we've had things going on the weekend, we haven't really tried that hard.
I know there are people that will disagree with what I'm about to say because they'll say, no, there's things like leptin and ghrelin, and there's all these chemicals and hormones that get set off in your body from intermittent fasting. But my belief is one of the curiosities about modern civilization is that we have access to unlimited amounts of food. We can have it in any quantity we want. There's no season in which carbohydrates are readily available and then ones where only fats are available. But now, in order to be able to manage that, we have to have rules. And those rules, it doesn't always really matter what rule you're applying, just that you apply one over the long term. And it's that sense of discipline that if you do the same thing over and over again, eventually you will dial it in and it'll work. And that's why I think intermittent fasting is a great idea for some people, because it says, hey, I can only eat meals during these hours, and it cuts out all of that decision making, just like wearing the same clothes every day does.
Right. In the very short time that I've been doing it, one of the things that I've loved is the time it saves me. Like
really?
In the morning, I realize, oh, I don't have to worry about rinsing out my smoothie cup, and I don't have to worry about actually making the smoothie. And
the activation energy that you waste, like, is it time to make a smoothie? Should I start making a smoothie?
Right. Just everything about it. I'm like, wow, this is kind of awesome. I just gained like at least a half hour in my day.
Wow.
Just not messing around with breakfast. And I know some people skip lunch and they do just like one meal a day. We've been doing 2 meals a day, so lunch and dinner. And I don't know. It's kind of nice. And then I hear about this thing called autophagy.
Yeah, the name is familiar. I'm not even going to try and say it because I don't want to be wrong.
AUTOPHAGY.
Autophagy.
Yeah.
Okay.
And apparently it's some kind of phase that your body gets into when you do intermittent fasting, where your cells will regenerate more willingly or more frequently or something. I truly don't understand it completely, but the idea is that like it helps improve your skin condition. If you have a condition on your skin, like eczema or something like that, it can help with that. I just think what a fascinating thing.
And it's great to explore, right? Like what a wonderful position we're in society, where you can try these things, and the cost to try them is just your discipline. And it's just does this throw other things out of whack in my life? Because unless you go to an extreme on them, they're not really all that dangerous of an idea.
Right. And honestly, what I think about it in the beginning here is it just doesn't, I think you mentioned this before when we were talking, it does feel like, oh, I'm just skipping breakfast. Well, I always used to skip breakfast. Like I have to make myself eat breakfast, honestly, because I don't really want it. And so, yeah, it just seems not very different from that at all.
Yeah, I mean, just like everything else in my life, I have become extremely ordered about my food. So I eat the same thing at breakfast, and then I have my dinners planned throughout the week, so then they couple with my lunch. But if I wasn't that regulated, it would seem like intermittent fasting would be a fine plan, because it sets up a heuristic where I don't have to know a lot of the details. I just know that when I do this thing, then I get this result.
Right. Well, the other thing and I know that lots of people approach intermittent fasting a lot of different ways, but one of the things they say is that like you can kind of eat what you want to. And, when you are a person who like tries to find new ways to be healthy, like for instance, my husband was being low carb, and I don't eat meat, so like having that always be a part of your life where you're constantly trying to figure out, what am I going to eat? What's allowed in this particular diet I happen to be on right now. It takes away all of that. And really, if you just say, okay, I'm only going to eat from this time to this time, but it doesn't, it's not the end of the world if today I had corn chips and salsa for lunch, it just is freeing, in a way.
And it's really it's amazing how much time we spend thinking about wanting to be fit and wanting that to be something that's a deep part of our lives, but it's so complicated to know how to do it.
Right.
That's why I love heuristics, right? Just if I follow these rules, I don't even have to know why it works.
Right.
Have you heard of this guy named Naval Ravikant?
Mm-mm.
So Naval is a philosopher. I think he was like a venture capitalist, and then he started tweeting about interesting ideas. And he has a phrase, and I'm interested to see what you think of this as the artist, which is that all people want three things. They want to be fit, they want to be wealthy, and they want to be happy. Does that seem right to you? That kind of triangle?
I think so. I can think of other things too, but yeah.
What else? Because this is a thought experiment that I've been having with my friends lately, which is to say, is he right?
So fit, wealthy, and
Happy.
Of course, my first thought was creative. And so, but I guess happy, creativity leads to happiness for me.
Okay.
And so then my other thought was, yeah, fit is good for sure. And wealthy, it definitely relieves pressure.
Right. And wealth, well, really all of them. Wealth is one of those things that a lot of times it's a relative scale, right? Like you feel wealthy compared to what? Just like beautiful. You're beautiful compared to what?
Right.
And but the happy one is the one that is a nebulously defined idea, because if you can use happy to circle everything, then you would include creative in there. I would also think people like progress. I think even if you were wealthy, happy, and fit, the real sense of satisfaction in life is moving towards any one of those three things or all three at the same time, as opposed to the actual accomplishment of it.
Absolutely. I do think that drive is like one of the things that that keeps us going. And so, yeah, I can see how those three things can eventually not be enough, because you may want to achieve more wealth, or maybe you want to achieve a different type of happiness, or want to be fit in a different kind of way.
When you've talked about your husband and how he makes the boards for you, and he's not an artist, has he been understanding of the world of an artist to you, do you think?
Yeah, he's been extremely supportive, like always. He wants to see me succeed, but I think he also feels a sense of ownership over the business as well. I shouldn't say ownership. He's invested.
Okay.
Like emotionally invested in my business, because, as an artist, I don't really have like coworkers, and, he's my guy, like he comes home and I talk to him about my creative problem or my particular, prospect of a business prospect that might be happening, or he helps me work through controversial things with, fellow artists at the time, back when I had to deal with artists more often, or, so he's just in it 100% with me. And financially, he has supported us
Yeah.
all these years. He's a financial advisor. He owns his own business now, where he has partners, but he has his own business.
What's it called? Do you mind?
Oh, Strategic Financial.
Okay.
Yeah. And, he's successful. He's doing a really great job, and he's worked really hard to get there, because there was a time when, a while back, where he had lost his position, and that's what caused him to start his own business. And so he's, I'm so proud of him. And, I have to be held back from trying to think of new ways for him to make his business a success, because I'm like marketing crazy brain sometimes. But yeah, so financially, he's supported us more consistently all these years. And then I am competitive, so I try really hard to stay there with him if I can.
You've been a very different artist than I was expecting. I don't know what I was expecting, but now I see that my brother-in-law is the one that told me, Vance, you should have an artist on or a musician or something that's far away from, because a lot of the people that I was talking to were technical experts in things like chemistry or cardiology or architecture. And architecture is art in a large way, but we didn't get into the creative part of it. And I'm realizing now that his advice was really good because I had a caricature of who I thought you as an artist would be. And I wonder, that must happen to you a lot when people hear you're an artist.
Absolutely. Yeah. It can be when we talked about worrying about when people say something bad at an art fair. The most recent one I can think of is we were at the St. Louis Art Fair and my husband was kind of sitting back a little bit and I was sitting up front, and someone made the assumption that this was my hobby and he's the one that pays the bills. And every time, he's like, he's like, well, she's the one making money this weekend. So thankfully he's my champion,
Yeah.
But yeah, it's hard to swallow. Yeah. For people to make those kinds of assumptions that I'm not a driven person or that I'm crazy or that it's like my hobby, which there's nothing wrong with that. Like art can be a hobby, just like knitting or gardening, like that's fine, but that's not for me. That's not what it is for me. Maybe one day when I retire, it might be my hobby, but like I'm a driven person and this is my business and it means everything to me. And so for people to assume that it's, I don't know, optional or not as important or I don't know, it hurts.
And it's got to be a little bit weird because when you, like we said before, business and art seem to be in opposition to one another. And so to be seen as a business person or to be seen as an artist, either one is not a full picture of you.
Right.
But yeah, I don't even know exactly where I'm going with that, but it seems like an interesting situation that you must be in all the time.
It is. It's true. I would say the thing that makes me most like quote unquote artist like is probably how I am in my personal life. Like my kids call me a hippie, I'm a super big earth lover, environmentalist. I love music. I love to go to rock shows and, there's another side to me, but like I do approach being an artist as a business. And so I don't know. I think that I probably have those aspects that people think of. I mean, I am a little crazy. Like I'll admit it.
Yeah, we're all a little crazy.
Yeah.
Anybody that's putting anything out into the world that is them is a little bit crazy.
Yeah, but it doesn't define me as an artist. Like I don't use that as my description of me as an artist. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I don't want, she's full of anxiety and loves rock music to be my tagline on my website, I want it to be the part where I spread joy.
And in a world of an environment, my sense is that most of the people that are environmentalists are worried that the world is getting worse. Mm-hmm. And you're a person that's trying to put joy in the world. Is that an accurate representation? Do you feel like things are getting worse? And is that a good reason to put joy in the world?
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, so my paintings also can tend to be kind of like abstracted landscapes. We talked a little bit how I
about
do
the trees.
Tree paintings. Yeah. So I do paintings. They tend to be abstracted landscapes either way. And sometimes I just happen to have trees in them because I have a strong connection with trees. But the abstracted paintings they tend to look like landscapes too. And it's not always purposeful and it's definitely not realistic, but it's my attempt I am always connecting with nature, always. And when other people can connect with it that same way, I think that it's just good for everybody to connect with nature whenever possible. And so if, beautiful art reminds you of nature, reminds you to respect nature, reminds you to love nature, that's all good.
I love that. So I'm really glad you brought it back to trees. So if there was one form of art that my wife and we are very, very different in what we like as far as art. So mine is, I love human form. So I love like sculpture of people, and hence the Bruno Lucchese. I don't know if you know who he is, but he does all these really exceptional ways of like somebody shaking out a sheet so you can see the motion within the sculpture, but you can also see their body mechanics, which I think are just, I love it. I could look at human sculpture for hours and hours and hours. And my wife likes art that she can tell the artist took a long time to work on it.
Yeah.
So like going to MC Escher for her, this is great because there's no way you can put those tessellations together unless you really spent time poring over it. But the one area where we both overlap is that we're both really drawn to trees. And so we have tapestries that are trees and metal pieces of art that are trees. And then my mother-in-law recently came back from a trip to Ireland where she found my family crest, and on it is a tree, which I thought that was incredible.
That is so cool. That's really neat. So it's no accident, right?
I must not be. I mean, I think I had seen that before as a kid, but I never really registered.
Yeah.
But there's something almost spooky about that, about seeing the family crest as having the tree, because they're all over our house.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah. I wonder what your wife's connection is.
Yeah, I don't know. Probably. I think she became a Crow when we got married. So
there you go. I don't know. For me, trees have just always been like this special thing in the world, you know, that there's so many things I think about trees. I think about like if they could talk, what they would tell us. Like there's trees that have been here for so long. And just imagine if they could tell us everything they've seen. It would be amazing. And then to think about like everything about them is about growth and working together and making the world a better place all by themselves, you know, like we can't survive without them, and they can't survive with some of what we do.
I'm struck by trees about the speed with which they interact with the environment around them. Like the time it takes, you know, an oak tree to grow, you know, over 100 or 200 years. My friend had a magnolia tree in his yard that was like 120 years old, and it just died, and they had to cut it down. And he was devastated. But to your point, like the time scale of that tree and what it has seen and what is what's important and what's not important is really, really different to a tree than it is to a human.
Absolutely. Yeah.
What other forms of art do you find yourself being attracted to that aren't your own?
Oh, I love every kind of art. There's not like an art form that I am around that I don't find some value in. I was just thinking about recently that we went to see the Gauguin exhibit at the St. Louis Art Museum.
Oh.
And I don't know if you know very much about him, but he's like an abstract expressionist that I never, this is probably going to sound terrible, I never thought he was that great of an artist. I never understood why we were studying him.
Okay.
And, but, you know, he had this exhibit at the art museum, and my girlfriends wanted to go see it too. And so I was like, you know, I would like to see maybe like how he got to where he was, and maybe, like you mentioned, like seeing MC Escher's sketches from prior to
becoming a master.
Yeah, exactly. So I thought, well, that'll bring me around. And instead, I learned, I don't know why they had an exhibit for him, because I found out that this is totally off topic.
This is great.
But because I learned that he basically was like a pedophile, that he like moved to, I can't remember what island, some island, and he had lots of 14 and 15-year-old girls that would come and stay with him, and he would impregnate, and then he would leave. And he had this whole career where he was this, you know, famous artist and make all these paintings of these villagers that were beautiful villagers. And some of his paintings were okay and some not so great. But he's like a staple in art history.
Wow.
And all of my girlfriends and I, as we left, we were just like, why are we celebrating this man? If we know, like, why? Who cares?
That's an interesting question about do you think that what he was doing was wrong in his time?
No, unfortunately it wasn't.
That's an interesting question about judging an artist today based on societal norms that weren't there.
Right.
To you, do you feel like good to judge them? It's okay to do that, or just that's just the way that it is?
I'm not sure. I have mixed feelings about that idea that, like, just because right now we know this and think this, do we judge someone back then that didn't know and think that? I have mixed feelings. I don't think anything is ever really cut and dry. But my personal reaction was, I don't want to have anything to do with this guy, and I can't let go of that.
Yeah, I mean, and therein lies the exact challenge, because you find out somebody did horrible things and you think, well, I don't have a choice but to view them through the lens of who I am today. But at the same time, if you wipe away everybody that didn't fulfill the standards of 2019, I'm pretty sure 2000 Vance wouldn't be acceptable today.
Right.
And that actually, one of the concepts I mentioned before, Lindy. Have you heard of this term before? Mm-hmm. This is an interesting one. It's probably a good area for us to explore and then kind of wrap it up. But the concept of Lindy is the odds that an artifact, an object, whether it's art or writing, will be around in the future is in direct proportion to how long it's been around so far. So, and you're not always going to be right about that. But so, for example, let's say Oprah Winfrey's book that was written 20 years ago probably be around for another 20 years. Maybe it'll be around longer than that, but we can say pretty confidently that's how long. To Kill a Mockingbird will probably be around for another 50 to 60 years. The Bible has been around for, a couple thousand years. It's likely it will be around for a couple of thousands of years. So when you hear that concept as an artist, does it resonate with you?
I don't know. I've just never, ever given that any thought before. Do you mean like in relation to my own art?
Yeah. Do you think your art will be Lindy? Will it last long into the future?
I sure hope so. I mean, so I made my first paintings in 2001, and I've often thought, like, I know where one of them is because it's my cousin has it, but the other one I've always wondered, like, so is that like in the trash now, or did that owner of that bar, which closed now, like, what did she do with it? Is it in her home? Did she give it to someone? So I do think about that.
You've put a lot of your own emotion and things into the world, and it just goes.
I'll never know. Right. I mean, sometimes I'll know.
Wow. I did not think about that.
Mm-hmm. I've thought about it a lot. Like of course the bad thoughts are, oh my gosh, I'm going to see this on Craigslist one day. or sitting on the side of the road next to a trash can. That would be horrible. And then my fantasy is, what if someday, maybe after I'm gone, people put them all together somewhere and have a show, at some museum or something. That would be pretty awesome. But if my goal was to always spread joy, I suppose that's all I ever needed them to do. And if they did it during their time with someone, then I did what I set out to do. That's
great. I love that.
Thanks.
That's really cool.
Yeah, I don't know. I just thought of it.
It's amazing. I think most of the time we don't know what we think until we say it out loud, which is one of the joys of having a podcast, is that you get to ask somebody questions and then they get to decide what they think. And you may get down the driveway from the studio and be like, wait a second, I'm not so sure I do think that.
Yeah.
But at its core, it's fun to just explore, what do you think about things? And it's been a really great pleasure to have you here and to explore and to open up your world of artistry. You've been incredibly open, and I'm really grateful for it.
Oh, thank you. It was my pleasure.
If people wanted to learn more about your art or just stay connected with you on social media, how would they do that?
Well, my website is just www.heatherhaymart.com. And you can connect to my social media through my website, but I'm also on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, all with my name, Heather Haymart or Heather Haymart Fine Art.
And what do you put on your Instagram and Twitter? How do you decide what goes on there?
Well, it's usually my process. A lot of my studio work goes on my social media. And so, I just kind of made a rule for myself that every day that I make something, I'm going to share that on Facebook, or at least I try to remember to. So I'll take process photos while I work. Or maybe when I'm finished working, take a picture of what I just worked on that day, and then share a photo and maybe what I was thinking about, or today I'll probably share a picture with you.
Oh, that'd be great. I mean, that's neat to have that creative process. I will definitely follow and see if you brought your bucket of water down. And
I also have done videos too, but I haven't done that in a while. I would do time-lapse videos.
Oh, really? Mm-hmm. Of the whole painting process?
Yeah.
Oh, I'll definitely check that out. So I'll throw some of that in the links in the description.
Cool.
So this has been a great pleasure. Thank you so much for stopping by. I feel like this was one of the times when I learned the most about a person and a way of thinking about an entire discipline I knew nothing at all about. So
that's awesome.
Thank you so much for coming by. Well, that's going to do it for this week's interview with Heather Haymart. Thank you so much to Heather for stopping by. I recognize that I broke up her morning creative process, but I hope it was worth it. I know that I was dropped right into the center of a whole different network of people that I didn't know anything about. And that was when Heather posted her Instagram photo of us doing this interview. There were loads of people there that were really excited for her. And I got to see not only Heather's art on Instagram, but then the artists that were interested in seeing her do a podcast. And that's a great piece of advice. You know, if you are listening to this podcast and you find one of these guests interesting, go stop by their Instagram or their Twitter, check out what they're talking about, what they're interested in, and then look at who are they interacting with, who is interacting with them, because that's how you make one hop out and you find people that you would never have found on your own. And I know from exploring some of Heather's network that she has friends that run the gamut, an incredible spectrum, everything from artists to what look like bookkeepers and all sorts of other people. So today, this week, if you don't have somebody to follow or some new network to get into, go check out Heather Haymart Art and send her a note that you heard her on the Vance Crowe podcast. I'm going to sign off for here. Just remember to stop back on Friday when we have a bonus episode. This week, I am going to be talking about the art of journaling, which if somebody would have told me that I was ever going to make a podcast on journaling, I would have laughed. But it actually is probably one of the foundational skills that makes me me. And I think that it could make you even more you that you can be. So I'm going to sign off for now. Thanks for joining.